This will be a very, very interesting talk, and I would like to welcome you. Just have a seat if you want to participate. This is Arne Bellstorf, our German comic artist, who came from Germany to the comic festival. So if you want to join us, have a seat. So thank you very much for coming.
Okay, I will start and just show you some of the pictures that I found from Astrid Kirchherr, the photographer, the girl up there with Stuart. Because it all started when I saw her pictures, and I found her pictures actually on the internet when I was looking for pictures from Hamburg in 1960. So I was basically interested in the time, and I wanted to do a book, a comic book about youth culture or youth subculture in Hamburg, the post-war generation that grew up during the war and then had to deal with the guilt of their parents, and the post-war generation that had to build their own culture then in Germany, and especially in Hamburg, which was really a bomb site back then. It was where almost everything was destroyed, and there was a small jazz scene in Hamburg back then, and which was really underground subculture thing, and also a small rock and roll scene, of course. So these two worlds met then in Hamburg in 1960, the early 60s, and Astrid and Stuart are the main characters in the book, and first I wanted to do a fictional story about this time, and I wanted to make up people, and okay, we'll have a few people representing the jazz scene, and then I found Astrid's photos, and it was only then when I realized that the Beatles played actually in Hamburg, and that their career started then in Hamburg. So that's, I think this was the photo I saw first of Astrid. It's quite a famous self-portrait of her in the mirror, taken at her room. She was living alone with her mother back then, and she had a room. You can see there's a tree branch. She painted black, and she was wearing black. Listened to jazz music, French chansons, and was really into French culture. She was an art student. She studied photography at the same school that I went to 50 years later. And in 1960, I think, she had just finished art school and became an assistant to a photographer, Reinhard Wolf, in Hamburg. So she was working as an assistant to him, and she was, kind of one of the leading figures in this art school jazz scene in Hamburg in the early 60s. She was called the Brigitte Bardot of Hamburg. I mean, on this photo she doesn't have it. She's this famous short hair, but later she had also long blonde hair, and she looked kind of Brigitte Bardot. So this is Astrid Kirchherr, and I found this photo. I thought, okay, she looks like a good protagonist for a book. I mean, she has this really distinctive look, and I didn't know that much about the Hamburg jazz scene, and they were really into French culture, and everything she had in her room was black, and she looked like this typical French bohemian existentialist people, listening to French chansons, Juliette Gréco, and Edith Piaf. So that was also new to me that the young German people back then were influenced that much by the French. Because I mean, as I said, this generation, the post-war generation, they avoided everything that was German. They wanted to be different from their parents' generation, and they turned towards French and took everything from France. And she was also a big fan of Jean Cocteau and his black and white music, and also black and white photography. So she was always taking black and white pictures. That was her world. Everything was black and white. And that was also the basic idea for the book, then, to have her black and white world as some aesthetic program for the whole book. So this is Reinhard Wolf, the photographer she was working for in his studio. And the funny thing about Reinhard Wolf is that he was working, he did a lot of commercial work for magazines and ads, and fashion, and everything. But his studio and the group of people that worked for him all from the art school in Hamburg. It was kind of avant-garde scene. And he had his studio, you can see this in the other photo, covered with silver tin foil on the walls, like Andy Warhol later had in his factory. So they had a lot of ideas of they were real avant-garde. I think they had a lot of ideas that became famous later in the 60s. Yeah, this is Reinhard Wolf again in his studio. And you can see interesting mixture of 18th, 19th century furniture and everything mixed with this modern table. And so, yeah, this is how the German avant-garde looked back in 1960. And this is Astrid and her friends, who all worked for Reinhard Wolf, and all in black, the same moody look. And I mean, they were inspired by the French existentialists and the French bohème, but as I said, they avoided to be German and look French. But I think on this photo they look more German than French, because they were really serious about themselves and everything. So, but yeah, this is a good example of the idea of their movement. So everybody had to wear black, and it was also this really unisex thing going on. The boys had long hair, the girls had shorter hair, so they had almost the same haircut for boys and girls. And Astrid is, you can see up there, and right below her is her friend Klaus Former, who's also important later. Yeah, that's it, Klaus Former. So the book starts with Astrid and Klaus just having split up, and I think he was her ex-boyfriend at that time, but they were still close and part of the same small scene. And this is the first photo Astrid took of the Beatles then. And this is where the book actually then begins, when Astrid met these guys who came from a totally different world. They were English, but played American rock and roll songs in a German club. And there was a small cellar bar club in next to Hamburg Reeperbahn, which was the red light district of Hamburg, where actually people like Astrid and her friends from the middle class, upper class background, they wouldn't normally go there. It wasn't an area where people like them would go out. So Astrid went there with Klaus because he told her, "You have to come with me to see this fascinating live rock and roll band." But in fact, rock and roll wasn't her kind of music. Was, you know, she was more the, as I said, the bohemian girl who thought this is working class people's music. So, but then she saw the Beatles on stage, and I don't know, maybe she didn't fall in love with the music, but with one guy in the group, in the band, who fitted more into her world, because he was the cool guy in the band who had sunglasses on and was always playing with his back turned towards the audience, and he didn't jump up and down shouting like John and Paul McCartney did. So he was really the cool guy in the group, and Astrid thought, okay, this is one of my kind. He's really cool. And then it turned out that Stuart, the guy with the sunglasses, was also an art student, so he didn't really fit into the rest of the group, and he was like Astrid and her friends, studying art in Liverpool, and he wanted to become a painter. So he was only in the band because of John Lennon, who talked him into the band and said, okay, you have to buy a bass guitar and come with us to Germany to play in these filthy clubs. And so that's how he ended up playing this band, but he never considered himself being a musician. And he clearly wasn't a good musician, and Paul McCartney always was complaining about Stuart, that he couldn't play bass. And yeah, so but then he met Astrid and her art student friends, and that's, well, this tragic love story begins. So this is also one of the first pictures Astrid took. As you can see, Stuart already moved to the focus of her pictures, and then the next step was that he was already wearing a long black scarf. So she slowly turned him into the guy that she wanted him to be. But he's still this quiff haircut and the Beatles, the former Beatles, the old Beatles rock and roll haircut. But then, they immediately fell in love. Astrid said it was love at first sight. They got engaged only 1 month later, in November 1960, and they wanted to get married as soon as possible. And on these pictures, you can already see Stuart with his new haircut, the new serious German look on his face, and he was already part of the Hamburg XC art school scene. In Reinhard Wolf's studio, and Astrid in the mirror on the staircase. So I think this is from 1961 or 2, 1 year later maybe. And then he moved into Astrid's place and also had the attic as his kind of studio where he was working on his paintings, and then he started studying again in Hamburg, got a scholarship for the Hamburg art school, and was on his way becoming a painter finally. He left the group, the Beatles, and they were still, not the Beatles we know, but this unknown, not famous band just there. They were not playing their own songs. They didn't have Beatles songs then. They were just playing Chuck Berry and Little Richard songs. So Stuart was the first to adopt this haircut, and his hair longer. And on this picture, this is after Stuart's death. You can see John and George, they already had their hair kind of down, but it wasn't the Beatles haircut. They, I think it was 1 year later that they finally adopted this haircut that all the Hamburg art students had. So this is from 1963 or 4, their second LP. Where you can clearly see Astrid's influence. They are wearing black turtleneck sweaters. Yeah. And the famous top haircut. So this was just my inspiration before I started the book. This is all Hamburg, 1960, Astrid, and her influence on the Beatles. Yeah, I think that's it for a short introduction.
Who knows the book? Who saw Babies in Black before?
We have the original German version with a different cover, the better cover. Artistically in the library, of course. In the British/North American version, they would probably insist on putting.
No, there's also a British version with the European cover.
Oh,
so
okay.
this is only
So
the
this is
North American.
It's going to be
edition.
Japanese version too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming out next month.
It's the same
Oh,
cover?
really?
No, totally different cover. Yeah.
Totally
What's the
different
difference
cover.
in
the-
How different can it get? Actually, I mean.
They used a different drawing for the cover, and they changed the typography again. So it's not this typewriter typography and not this handwriting. It's totally different. I mean, it's Japanese. It's of course, it's, different letters, but yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't decide to keep that.
No, they
because
didn't use. Yeah.
That's interesting. Because that's very powerful, I was actually going to say. I mean, it's one of the few books where I would encourage people to judge it by its cover. Because it is, it really draws you in, and you have this distinct style. That was already in here. That's the other book that we have in the library here. Acht, Neun, Zehn. Did that come out in English? No, it didn't. You told me. And then there's Klassenfahrt as well, I know, which is a shame, because this is also, I think, a book that culturally translates very well. Because I think everybody who's had any kind of youth anywhere, that's probably all of us, can relate to a lot of that. I just remember going through it again, and our copy is falling apart. That's a good sign, I guess. And I remember thinking, this page, for example, just perfectly describes my youth summers in the middle of Germany. There's no words even, but this is Germany. This is middle Germany. It's really amazing how you capture that. And actually, one of my questions, starting maybe in the periphery, and then circling back to the book again, would have been about time and place. And you did start out referring to it as well, that you didn't set out wanting to write a book about the Beatles, and this is not a book about the Beatles anyway, right? But what it is that Babies in Black is looking at the seminal time and place in Germany, that newly defined sort of a youth subculture after the war, and specifically the city of Hamburg, right, which also happens to be your not quite hometown, but adopted hometown,
Yeah.
and you are from northern Germany, and I think that does mean something. I was wondering, what is it about Hamburg for you that is, what is your relationship with Hamburg, or what is it about Hamburg back then and maybe also today, because we still talk about the Hamburger Schule to a certain degree. As you say, the art academy still has this particular flavor that it's known for. there's the Hamburger Schule or the Hamburg School of pop music that Tokotronic, for example, belonged to. So there seems to be this distinct style, but nobody can quite explain to me or define what it is. How do you relate to it? What is it for you? What makes Hamburg not London and not Liverpool? The Beatles must have come for some reason.
I mean, Stuart, I think it was Stuart who said that Hamburg is quite a lot like Liverpool in a way, because they're both ports, harbors, like, you know, working class cities, and also kind of open-minded liberal cities with art schools, and so I think you can compare Hamburg kind of Liverpool, for example, or other British towns. So Hamburg is maybe the most British German town because it's there in the north, and it's totally different from Munich, for example. So so I would say this is the typical thing about Hamburg then is that it's, you know, the people are more like, you know, relaxed and cool. So this then Astrid again, that she's, I think, really typical northern German character.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know about this term, the Hamburger Schule, the school of Hamburg. It relates to the music and the bands that came out in the 90s, the early 90s, and inspired by this do-it-yourself thing. And then Hamburg.
Some similar hairstyles,
yeah,
actually, now that you say it, they
Brit
kind of
pop.
hark back to that.
Britpop
It was
era.
Britpop wave, yeah.
So Hamburg, I think, was always heavily influenced by British culture. So that's maybe the connection with the 60s and then the 90s, where the Hamburger Schule.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean.
And it is home.
Yeah. To me,
Yeah.
it's just the place where I feel home the most, because I couldn't live in Munich or Bavaria. This is a different part of Germany. I mean, Bavaria has this thing that, you know, the cliché of Germany is always Weißwurst, Bratwurst, and beer and Oktoberfest. But that's not Hamburg. That's Munich.
Yeah.
And Hamburg is
Hamburg
really
is what,
different from
tea?
that. We don't have Oktoberfest.
The harbor,
Yeah.
Yeah.
People would drink tea rather than.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. It never quite occurred to me, that British connection, but it is.
I think
It is sort of British culture in Germany in a
Yeah.
way. It's actually very true. Looking at the graphics, especially in this book, how detailed, and I don't want to say true, it's a stupid word, or accurate, are you when it comes to the time, the place, and the people you portray in your work? So here, Hamburg, Astrid, Stuart, how much do you research visually? And I think, I mean, you've shown us some.
Yeah.
You seem to be a bit of a researcher, which is maybe kind of makes you stand out among your colleagues too. But how much is a felt environment? Because you do create these. Is it just like the one I just showed? I mean, it was one page, and I had this kind of flashback, emotional flashback to my youth, right? You create this in just a few panels, but there's places in here. I don't know if I can find it right now, but the first here, the Ankerbar, like in the Kaiserkeller. So the famous, if you know the Beatles history, everybody knows the Kaiserkeller. So how would you go about this? Are you really serious about the poster here?
The poster
and the
is
street
the
corner.
authentic poster. I have this poster.
So you do research this.
I did a lot of research. I mean, it took me about 1 year just doing research and talking to Astrid about everything. And then I started writing, doing the storyboard for the book.
Yeah.
And so it was, 3 years. It took me 3 years to finish the whole book. And 1 year was just doing the research and collecting books and with photos from that time. I mean, the 60s are quite well documented.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of black and white photography, and so I had a lot of photos as a reference for the street scenes and everything, the buildings. I mean, this is Große Freiheit next to Reeperbahn, which kind of looks the same still, but with different displays and clubs, of course. But it's really a narrow, small street, and there's still the same vibe. It's been more commercialized, and of course there's not much of the underground scene anymore. So it's still the red light district of Hamburg.
Yeah.
Astrid and Klaus, they were the first from the upper class people to actually go there in the evenings into the bars and everything. But back then it was really difficult. They were afraid that they might end up in a fight or something. So today it's really safe to go there. Every art student goes there. So,
but it was pretty seedy, and it was still
yeah.
not too long ago. It was known to be pretty edgy and pretty seedy.
It actually has changed with Astrid and her people and the Beatles, because when they played there, that was really a seedy and filthy place. But then the Beatles became famous, and when they played, the book ends in 1963 when the Beatles came back to open the Star Club. And the Star Club was this big club on Große Freiheit, where all the big famous bands of the time played. So I think this was when it really changed. The Reeperbahn became the kind of German Broadway. And now we have the big musicals and Sister Act and everything. So this is how Reeperbahn looks nowadays. But back then it was,
And from the work that I know of yours, I thought it seemed typical and probably also telling about you that you'd write a story around the Beatles, not about the Beatles, and before they were famous. Do you think that the side story and the, in a good way, peripheral perspective is perhaps more interesting to you sometimes than the big plot?
Yeah.
Like you didn't write about the Beatles and the opening the Star Club and then everything that came after. You, as you say, you end the book with Stuart's death actually in '63.
Yeah. No, I never wanted to do a book about the Beatles and their career, because I wasn't interested in telling the story of the biggest band in the world. It always sounded ridiculous. So when I found Astrid and her story, I thought this is really a good way to tell a story along this big band. I mean, it was so interesting to see that Beatles were influenced by Astrid and her art school scene, and that they had all these ideas the Beatles later adopted. I mean, it's not only the haircut; it's also the whole their interest in fashion and their interest in everything new. And I think it was when they got to know Astrid that they realized that there's more than just rock and roll. So I think it was important to the Beatles that they came to Hamburg and play in these clubs, and then eventually dropped this boring rock and roll image, this pose of wearing leather and the Elvis haircut and everything. I think it was really the times were about to change with this image. So I think it was really important for their career that they became this mass phenomenon. And they had always, when you look at the Beatles' career, they always had a lot of influences from certain subcultures and things that were going on, and they transformed it into something that was accessible for the masses. And not only with their music, but also with their look and everything. So that was what I found interesting about, especially about Hamburg and Astrid and her scene, that they really started a lot with the Beatles and pop culture in general.
Your work is often a bit wistful or melancholic. I think in this case even nostalgic in a good way, and a look back often at youth most of the time. I think it goes for Klassenfahrt as well. those groups.
Acht, Neun, Zehn.
And Acht, Neun, Zehn, class trips, coming of age story, and this. You seem to progress a bit. We're in our early 20s now. But tell us a bit about your personal relationship with Astrid Kirchherr, with the tragic love story, of course, is we can all relate to that to a certain degree. But like you said, she is an alumna of the Hamburg Art Academy, and it just, I can't put my finger on it, but it feels so intimate and tender. I mean, just again, this look here that you display, where they're just looking past each other and past us, but it's still all there. Was there a bit of a sort of a Seelenverwandtschaft, would be the German word, a congeniality or a kinship that you felt with her?
Yeah. I mean,
and then how did it relate to reality? Because then you went on to meet her after you'd met her art.
Yeah, the first meeting was, I was really afraid of that meeting, but then it was, suddenly there was this mutual agreement on a lot of things that we both agreed on, that this book won't be about the Beatles. So Astrid was really reluctant to talk about her friendship with the Beatles, because most of the journalists and most of the people that approach her are always interested in the Beatles and all the gossip about John Lennon, and did he, I don't know, kiss this girl or even guy, or all the gossip about John Lennon and Paul McCartney that was going on during the Hamburg days. So, and when I said to her that I was interested in her background and where she came from, and I wanted to tell the story from her point of view, and I wasn't interested in the Beatles as in their career, and that was the thing that she agreed on, that we wanted to focus on their love story, and because it's difficult because you cannot do a book about the Beatles pretending that you don't know who these guys are. I mean, but back then it was up to us that it was just John and George. They were just four guys from Liverpool.
Yeah.
They had
and
no
George
idea. They had
is
no
here,
idea
he's
of
what, 16, 17?
Yeah, George was only 17.
That was the problem on here too. He gets sent back home.
And they had no idea of what if what would become of them later. So they had no idea that actually a band could get this big. I mean, John always said, okay, I want to be as big as Elvis or something, but in a way he even succeeded to do this, really. I mean, he achieved much more than Elvis in a way.
Bigger than
Elvis. So
he
was bigger than Elvis, maybe. So, so it was difficult to portray these people as they were back then.
Yeah, minus the hindsight that we now have, of course.
Yeah.
You do mention John a bit, and I was kind of wondering as I read the book last week, and I had this feeling, and it might be my personal reading of it, but I had a feeling that out of all the Beatles in it, John featured a bit more prominently than the others. For you, I had a feeling that he's the maverick kind of guy. He's also the guy who has this one, what was the sentence where he says, don't forget we won the war. So he provokes his audience, right? He says that in Hamburg, not 15 years after, which was really still very close. So he was playing with that. He was a bit on the edge. And you seem to pay a bit more attention to him than to, let's say, Paul.
But that's the one thing is he was clearly the leader. He was always the
visionary,
one in front. But then he also was the best friend of Stuart, so that's why he's important for Astrid and Stuart. So he was the one who talked Stuart into the group and said, okay, you have to come with me to Germany. So Stuart and John had a close relationship, and then also I personally just found John Lennon to be the most interesting character of the group. I mean, George was really young, and Paul was, I don't know, I didn't find that much about Paul. I mean, there were a few anecdotes that Astrid told me, but he was never that close with Astrid. It was always Astrid and Stuart and John. And Paul was, Astrid said it, Paul always was the serious musician. He was always, from the beginning, always interested in the music. And so when Stuart left, he was immediately took Stuart's place and said, okay, I will buy a bass guitar and I will be the bassist. We don't need a new bassist.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, there are a lot of reasons why John is more prominent than the others.
Yeah, but it's really nicely done how that comes across. While again, like you didn't set out to write a book about looking at the constellation of the Beatles, I mean, even at the time, but you still kind of get it across. While of course you focus on that love story. Looking a bit close again, I don't know whether you want to show us more images, but we're not gonna. It's not a spoiler alert because we know how the story ends quite tragically, but that was for me towards the end. There was a really strong panel because this is the spread where Stuart dies really, and it has next to no words. It really has no words. Astrid says, sorry, I have the German version. Astrid says, but on the phone, and then she says, okay, I'll come. And the rest is just, you still have the speech bubbles, but it's just ... And I was wondering how literally do the words come into your pictures or not in this case, and why you decided, and how you work, and how you decided, especially on the ending and how to portray this, because of course it's tricky, it's a tragic ending, it could be really, it could go wrong, right? You could have everybody in tears, but you don't, and then it actually doesn't end there, it continues. Interestingly, so it's all very subliminal. Kind of, we have to really infer that Stuart died and what happened, and then it sort of mellows out, which is actually, I guess, what happened to their love. But how did you kind of go about that development of the book?
I mean, it was really hard to depict somebody dying, or he was suffering headaches and he fainted in class before. So there were hints of his disease or whatever he had. We don't really know what led to his death. He had his brain hemorrhage, bleeding in the brain. So, but back then doctors didn't find out what caused this bleeding. So, but when he died on the ambulance in Astrid's arms, Astrid never thought of that this could actually happen. She always thought, okay, he might get better soon, and he was 21.
Yeah.
And she said, no, they never thought of death as something that could happen to you when you're young. So I wanted the end to be like really this shock as it felt to Astrid. It was this moment of suddenly he's gone. There are no words to describe that. So, and that's also the idea was to have this as the most existential thing that ever happened to Astrid. I mean, she was reading Camus and Sartre and people like that, and she read about the most absurd thing, which Camus said, death is the most absurd thing that we have to deal with, and then it happened to her when she was on 22. So, and it was clear that the book had to end with this event. There is nothing that goes beyond his death, actually, because it also ended her. I think she had lost more than Stuart. Then she was, I mean, she tried to go on as a photographer, but was the same time when the Beatles then suddenly became famous. And she became famous for having portrayed the Beatles. Everybody wanted to see her Beatles portraits, and she couldn't go on with her career being a photographer if there wasn't a Beatle somewhere on her photos. So, and it's a really tragic story, not only the love story with Stuart, but also the story with Astrid and the Beatles, because she didn't have the power of strength to go on. Yeah, but that's not what the book is about. This is the story that goes beyond
that.
But
you leave us with that quite powerfully. Before we go on further, maybe people have more pertinent questions or better questions. I'd have a few more. Where's my iPhone? In terms of time. Time.
7:50.
I'll have a few more. One more. Let's come back to Arne Bellstorf for a bit, maybe.
Yeah, and maybe better not to talk about the tragic ending of the book too much.
Too much.
It's not the most entertaining part of it.
No, and you wanna, one has to sort of read to get to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But when I mentioned to a Berlin friend on the weekend that we'd have Arne Bellstorf here at the Goethe today, he immediately said, "Oh yeah, of course, Arne. Yeah, I read his comic strip in the Tagesspiegel, which is monthly. Is it monthly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, still is. How? And I've seen some of them, and some of them are quite brilliant. Again, like you have this knack for three images, creating a whole world, mostly a world of tristesse or." It's hardly ever very happy. Sometimes it is. But I was just wondering about how you approach these two sides of production of comic art differently in terms of creation. Like doing a short monthly strip, I assume you do it quite freely without any, they don't tell you to focus on something. It has this beautiful title, Vom Leben gezeichnet, right?
Yeah, but that wasn't my idea. It's just
So it's clever. It's impossible to translate. It's a sort of ambiguity or double entendre. But it means sort of worn face, but it also means drawn by life, as drawn by life. So your face is drawn by life. But and then there's this side, right? Authoring an entire long form narrative, like Babies in Black. What does each format give you or allow you as an artist or afford you other than a monthly paycheck, perhaps? How do you approach it?
Yeah. I mean, working on a graphic novel like Babies in Black, it took me 3 years to do this book, and it's totally different from my work that I do monthly for the Tagesspiegel or illustration jobs I do for other German newspapers, because I'm really slow with drawing, and I need a lot of time to come up with a story and have it, the idea for the whole story. I need everything in my head clearly, visible before I start drawing. So that's why drawing a whole book really, it's quite exhausting and takes a lot of time. And doing this short, I mean, it's one big Sunday newspaper page, so it's also kind of big page, but it also it takes me a week maybe then to do this Sunday's page, and this is a good it's a good amount of time to come up with an idea and then draw the idea in 2 pages, 2 days, and then it's done. And that's good to, and then just give it away, and then it's printed, and then I don't have to think about it anymore. But doing a book means 3 years of constant work and constant thoughts going on in your head. Will this turn out to be something worth doing it? And so I really like the short form, the short 1-page thing, because it's more satisfying in a way, because takes
Really,
a week
yeah?
and then it's done, and I can sit down and relax and say, okay, this is printed now, but doing a book means totally different.
Potentially
way of-
endless your work on it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, the research phase you described. And
Yeah.
How do you do it? You know, so many different ways to go about it. But do you develop it all in your head first, or do you sketch and storybook quite a bit of it actually, or once it's like then you sit down and put it on paper, or how do you?
The book? Or
Yeah, when you do the book.
I had the story
Do you label?
about the storyboard was more 80% of the book. Then I started drawing, but I didn't have the idea for the end. So I was working on the book and still was thinking, okay, I don't know how we'll.
What do you do when I get there?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, on page 180. But so I need this kind of freedom to just start something, and there's a way out, but I don't know how. Maybe, and so it leaves something for me like there's still this tension. Like I can surprise myself with something that I would come up with during the process. So it would be really boring to just sit down and draw 200 pages and I know where I will end.
Yeah.
So it's good to have maybe just 10% not finished when I start drawing. And I would still change a few things while I draw the book. But yeah, about 80% is all laid out in the storybook when I start drawing.
I was also wondering about sort of the characters actually, and I mean in this in particular, because really Astrid is the protagonist, Stuart is also important, but he's also sort of a quiet kind of guy, and I guess he probably just was a quiet kind of guy, or he comes across differently or more non-verbally. How do you relate to your characters? Are you their god and creator? You know, you've said them and you met Astrid, of course, and must have thought about her, or do you feel more like an observer who then tries to do them justice on the page?
I try to be like really to just be not, it's Astrid's story, and I try to have it told like she had told the story from her point of view. But then again, I am not Astrid. I have a different view on certain things, and especially when you tell a love story, it's difficult to be really not there with them. When they fell in love, it was like, as I said, this love at first sight. They were deeply romantic couple. They were really, and it was difficult for me to depict a couple in love like Astrid and Stuart, because my first book, Acht, Neun, Zehn, was about growing up in the 90s, this post-ironic era. You couldn't, falling in love with someone was different
Look at the guy.
then, and so it
and
was,
there's a little bit of a love story there too.
But I had to understand how it felt being young in that time. And Astrid told me, we were, and then he gave me a rose, and I thought, okay, he gave me a rose.
Really?
But that would be really strange thing today to give someone. No, but of course. But they were seriously romantic about giving someone a rose, and maybe reciting a poem or something. So that was the most difficult part to understand how their relationship worked, because also it was like handing a rose to someone was like a really symbolic act, because they couldn't talk that much. He could say "Ich liebe dich" maybe in German, but Stuart didn't speak much more German than maybe this one sentence.
Yeah.
So Astrid had to learn English then, and
her English wasn't great.
No, her English wasn't that good, and
yeah.
she, I mean, it was all about symbolic gestures and the looks they gave each other, and the visual thing was going on between them.
Yeah, and you have another little sort of brilliant ploying in here that works really well. I mean, this is one of the pages I loved because it's there. He looks this way, but she looks this way, and here at the latest you get it. What's going on between them? It's really this love at first sight, quite literally, and then you use the songs also to have this sort of underlying subtext really. Here, like this says, you know, a girl, I said, I wish you were mine. And this is really where they were kind of at already. And then it takes, I'm surprised, as I was looking for it, another 40 pages to get to this first, as you say, quite
first kiss,
romantic, but also very existentialist. She takes him out to the woods and they're all, you know, barren, and the first kiss on the scarf. But it's, yeah, really, it's where there's not even words, and it's just so powerful, and also it's, yeah, very tender without being voyeuristic. Yeah, it's really quite beautiful, I have to say. And the rest, maybe we should really sort of leave it because it's so hard to explain, because it's based on experiencing it and feeling it, maybe. Maybe, well, you know, you can still come up to Arne and ask him. I have one more question though, also to get away from the somber modes. You seem to have an eclectic taste in music, although I understand this is not about sort of musical topics, but you have to admit it does pop up, and Ruth mentioned it in her introduction. How does one get from Germany's hard rock expert hit band, the Scorpions, that was about, what, 10 years ago, to now sort of a Beatles topic, and what's next? The Beastie Boys is my hope. No? You mentioned
like
what's next. You have a book in the works, right?
It's more coincident that I did this book about the Scorpions and now ended up doing a book about the Beatles. The Scorpions is really just a small...
I've never seen it, unfortunately. But
it's more like a small zine.
Yeah.
And because the Scorpions have this image of, you know, the German hard rock band, but to me they always were this kind of stiff, boring characters coming from Hanover, Germany, and I never understood how they became
petit bourgeois, actually, right?
Yeah.
But they were big in Russia.
Yeah,
they're
and they
huge
used
abroad.
to be big in America. I mean, they were the most successful German band for a while. So
before Rammstein.
Yeah, but so that's maybe the thing with German bands. They have to be like, in a way, typical German. Like Rammstein, they have this.
It's a certain flavor.
Yeah, and maybe the Scorpions worked on the same level then for a while. But I never understood that, because being German, you look at these people from a different point of view. You see this guy, this what's it called, Klaus Meine, the lead singer. He's really small, and he wears this cap, hiding his baldness.
That's amazing. You really don't like the Scorpions, but yet you did a whole.
Yeah, but making fun of them. I mean, the book wasn't. It was really a joke, a zine I put out about stupid.
The idea.
I mean, the title was "The Incredible Strange World of the Scorpions," and it was, you know, about the Scorpions at home. For example, Klaus Meine at home in his small house near Hanover with his wife and his cat. So it's
probably like Paul McCartney.
Yeah, maybe Paul McCartney.
On a smaller level. But okay, so the new book, the question was really about what's in the works.
I don't think my next book will be about a band or music, maybe.
You don't have a...
I have a few ideas, but no. At the moment, I'm a bit reluctant to do another book about famous rock band or something. Yeah.
So we'll probably have to wait a few years from what it...
That connects all my books and maybe all my work is my interest in youth and coming of age stories. So, and when I did Acht, Neun, Zehn, I wanted to depict the youth, my youth. It's not autobiographic, but it's about growing up in the 90s in
middle Germany. Yes.
Yeah,
yeah. I grew up a bit
Germany,
before that, but
and there was nothing. There was no youth culture, and it was a total lack of youth culture or subculture. So, and that's why I was so interested in Hamburg in 1960, because there were a lot of things going on, and they invented a lot of things. I mean, it was the beginning of pop culture as we know it today. So.
Yeah, they literally go out every night, right? And Baby's Black, and here I just lost it. So this is what happens. It's in his life, right? So eats a slice of pizza.
It's about being bored, playing video games.
Yeah, but sleeps, walks around, kind of. And still, it's a beautiful book because we can all to a certain degree relate to it. So these are in our library. This is in German only, but we do have it. Arne is also the first, as I was trying to sort of think about this event, I grabbed our edition here of Comics, Manga and Co. New German Comics Culture, which was a huge Goethe project that came with a traveling exhibition that we showed together with to the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. Thank you, Peter, and thank you for having Arne here. Showed it last year very successfully. But who, of course, the first artist in there is Arne Bellstorf. So you can also, and this is in English. I find this interesting. We'll stop, but it's interesting because it shows some of your shorter strips that are quite different. Also in style, like you also have this slightly different style that you sometimes use on this set.
Yeah, Babies in Black is maybe different from my.
Oh really? Yeah.
This is, yeah. I usually would draw more. It's more clean. It's more ligne claire.
Yeah.
But for Babies in Black, I chose to use this crayon thing for the gray shades and for
there's a bit of
kind of smoky 60s atmosphere.
Yeah. Okay, I'll leave you with there was a great review in the National Post last week of the book, and there was one sentence that I thought was brilliant. Maybe you hate it, but I thought it was brilliant about your style. So slow courtship, deep love, tragic love. This is echoed in Bellstorf's art, drawn with fuzzy edges and filled in with noticeable pencil marks that suggest both the imprecision of memory and the fact that, though these are characters we may know well, they're still figuring themselves out. And that's, I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's exactly what you capture, right? This before becoming something, and then of course it tragically ends, which is a whole different universe. But that is so reflected in this, as you describe it, it's like a change of style from the ligne claire. And go buy the book; it's over there. My copy is over there.
Yeah,
I'll grab it. My personal copy that I just and I'm sure you're willing to sign if people want to. Thank you so much for coming, but thank you for Arne Bellstorf. It really is a pleasure having you here. And hope to see you again with the next book in a couple of years after the research phase.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to Begaling and Peter.